So much more than a database, the modern data platform delivers a range of functionality that enables better experiences for customers, partners, and corporate employees. Whether for customer data, third party data, or other use cases, modern data platforms enable organizations to be more aware, responsive, and accountable. Learn more in this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here, and today we're going to focus on a pretty important topic in the world of data, folks. I can tell you that. Data platforms. Data platforms evolve. We're going to talk about what data platforms provide these days. They've been around for a while, but they're really getting very sophisticated in this modern world, and that's very good news for anyone in the business, quite frankly. So we're going to be talking to a couple experts, Chris Jones from a company called Amperity, and our friend Saket Sarab from Nexla. But first, I'll just give some background on what we mean by a data platform. So obviously, a lot of people know what a database is. There are so many databases out there these days. A data platform is much more than a database. It does persist data, of course, but it also persists data in a way that makes it much easier to leverage certain kinds of functionality. A lot of times for customer experience, a lot of times it's built around understanding who a customer is and being able to cater to them. So tracking what you purchased, tracking your preferences, things of this nature, really to optimize marketing as well. But there are lots of other reasons you could build a data platform. In fact, one of our guests from Nexla, they started off as sort of a clearinghouse for third-party data, but then they kind of moved into some other areas, and that often happens in the software world. Of course, you have your kernel, you build out some solution, and you build on top of that in the following years and do interesting things. So we're going to talk about what data platforms are, why they're important, why you should use them, and what to look for if you are shopping out there for a data platform. So first, maybe let's just get an opening statement from each of our guests. I've got Saket Sarab and Chris Jones. Saket, tell us a bit about yourself and what Nexla is doing in the data platform space.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm Saket, co-founder and CEO at Nexla. And you're absolutely right about where the world of data platforms is growing. What Nexla does in this space is we are all about making data ready to use for the users of data. And as you said, there are many types of users of data. It could be someone in marketing who's trying to analyze their ad spending. It could be someone in sales who's analyzing how effective the campaigns are. It could also be data scientists who are building some machine learning models, or it could be someone in finance or accounting who's looking at numbers and converting currencies and all sorts of operations that people do with data. So our function at Nexla, our mission is to make data ready to use for each of these types of users, which means make sure that the right data is in the system they use. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a database, it could be an API, wherever people need data, it is structured, it's validated, errors have been managed and so on. And the way we do that, the way we make it possible, is through automating data engineering. So data engineering is a function where people write code and do complex operations so that data can become useful for people. And, in the sort of line of sophistication, we're all about making even that piece automated, intelligent, smarter, and much more scalable.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. We'll get an opening statement too from Chris Jones from Amperity. Chris, tell us a bit about yourself and what you folks are doing at Amperity to leverage data platforms.
Great. My name is Chris Jones. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Amperity. The company was founded about 6 years ago. Prior to that, I was 27 years at Microsoft, leading a bunch of different product and engineering roles. And the fundamental problem that Amperity was founded to solve is helping large-scale consumer brands access and build a unified view of their customer. And when we say unified view of that customer, it really is a view of the customer that can be used and serve all aspects of the business, marketing, analytics, information technology. And fundamentally, the way to think about the uniqueness of our platform is that we applied cloud scale technologies, including machine learning technologies, to the problem of organizing and managing first-party data. And being able to take a whole set of messy data around the customer and do two things. Number one, find the linking key the matching key across messy customer data. And then number two, build all the normalized tables that you might need around the customer, what they've bought, what products they've used, where they've visited. And then make all that accessible to the different roles in the business and make sure that that data doesn't just sit in the data platform, but it actually gets published into the downstream systems, the call center that's the customer call center, the marketing automation systems, the business intelligence dashboarding systems. So think about Amperity's role as kind of the heart and the beating heart and engine that pumps high quality customer data to all parts of a consumer brand business so they can serve their customers better.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny, you mentioned a couple of things that struck my interest. One, just now you're talking about getting that data back into the apps. And there's this whole thing now people are talking about of reverse ETL.
Yeah.
So are you, it seems to me that you are already doing that, and now there's a term to describe that part of what you do. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's about right. I mean, if you think about the complexity that has to happen when you want to, again, let's use my analog of there's an engine and a heart that's pumping this data into different kinds of places. You need to make sure it gets mapped into the schema of the downstream system. In other words, the ticketing system has a schema and it's got to get mapped into it. And so it's not just being able to do reverse ETL, but it's also being able to do it in a way that has semantic knowledge and understanding of what the attributes are, clear role-based permissioning for what things can go into that system, and then regularly scheduled and monitored workflows so that the heart beats. Every single day, new data comes in every single minute. And so you've got to have all of those things working together to make this function.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's really important too, because we spend all this time and effort capturing data, trying to persist it somewhere. And you mentioned the sort of messiness of it. And that's, oh my goodness, that's so true for so many different reasons. And you're looking for the signal between. It's very interesting stuff, because what are you trying to do? You're trying to optimize marketing. You're trying to optimize sales. You're trying to optimize the experience that the customer has, and you're using the data you have about them to do that, right?
Yeah, I think it's a very simple thing to ask. Walk into any consumer brand and ask the following question. How many people do you have that have spent more than $1,500 lifetime to date and aren't in the loyalty program?
Right.
It turns out that's a really hard question to ask at most consumer brands. Right. And typically the access pattern of that question might take days or hours or weeks. That answer needs to be known instantly. It needs to be known when you're personalizing the web page. It needs to be known right in the customer call ticketing system. So it's not enough to get the data right and accurate. That's hard. It also has to get to the right place. It can't just sit in the data warehouse. It has to get into the employees' hands that are serving the customer.
Yeah. No, that's really important. And maybe I'll bring in Saket again to kind of comment on this. You had a slightly different take. As I recall, you were sort of a clearinghouse at first. One thing I really liked about your approach was that you would, if I recall correctly, someone would take like clickstream data, for example, and publish it in Nexla. And then other folks can come along and use that data for their own purposes. Obviously, there are some terms and conditions. But you would also publish in a variety of formats, right? Like Parquet format or other sort of ETL or data integration ready formats, such that someone can come in and whatever solution they're using, they can just patch it right into that particular target. Is that about right?
It's in the right context in the sense that, we started with the problem that when companies work with other companies together, then there is data flow between them. And that is usually one of the most complex because there's not a lot of standard around it. So when, for example, today our customers like DoorDash and Instacart, they get a huge amount of data from grocery stores, right? Which store has what products, how many units are there, what aisle is it in, and so on, right? Now, for these companies, getting this data from, say a CVS or an Albertsons or different stores, different formats, different APIs can be a challenge, right? So the automation of data engineering is about making that part simpler, automated, and easy. And therefore, we were sort of enabling that data that was going across companies and bringing that. Today, we have expanded a lot more because the concept of that data ready to use in your hands and is coming from all places and so on is common. So today, like Johnson & Johnson is using us when it comes to, data that helps them in their pharmaceutical research area. We have LinkedIn who uses us for marketing, team that uses us. Companies like Varsity in education space, one of the largest banks uses us for their AI team. So the applications are across the board, but ultimately all these people need the data in their hands in the tool where they can use it. And to Chris's point, that was basically, I think what you're saying is that having the data is not sufficient. Having it be applied to the right place is necessary. So we actually are at the place where we get the data ready to use, and then users on platforms like what Chris has, they will actually connect it to something specific and get an outcome. Like, hey, users who or my customers who are not in the loyalty program, well, let's send them a mail or something to join the loyalty program, so that action can then be taken on that data.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I'll throw it back over to Chris. Yeah, the blessing and curse of information systems these days is there are so many ways to get any particular thing done. And you go from one company to another, and there's very little similarity in terms of the sort of end-to-end solution that they put together. So you get to these legacy environments with all these different applications, with different interfaces and different price points, quite frankly. And then, of course, you get all these new solutions coming down the pike. So it can be downright bewildering for the professional in our industry to figure out which tools to cobble together. But I think the key in both of these cases, because you provide data platforms, is that you're really trying to deliver the data provisioning, and I'm guessing to a certain extent, enriching or cleansing services that would be expected for such a solution. And that can feed into any of these target systems that someone is using. Is that about right, Chris?
That's about right. I mean, one of the observations that we made, and I think our two companies have taken similar approaches to probably different domains. The observation we made is that 80 to 90% of what every consumer brand wants to know about the customer is the same. It's the same. They all have to understand who they are, so they need the linking key across personally identifiable information that they collect with consent. They need to know what products they buy, what channels they visit on, where they like to respond. And most of the time, if you go talk to someone in analytics or data science or IT, they're spending all their time doing the 80% of the stuff that's common and not their time doing the 10 to 20% that's unique. And so what we've done is we've automated that 80%. Like the example I always use is, hey, 90% of our DNA is the same, right? Well, it's true, but it's the small parts that make us different. And so when we think about a data platform, we really think about two things. Number one, it standardizes a set of things that you want to do. So it standardizes and creates out of messy data these normalized tables that are the 80 to 90% of what you want. And then two, it empowers a trained user to program the platform so that it benefits the employees at the brand. So that means that we don't start with some fixed notion of what the schema around customer is, because for Brooks Running, it's very important to know what kind of shoes the people use. But at T-Mobile, it's more important to know where their subscription is. Did they start as a pay-as-you-go user and then wanted to go and turn into more of a subscriber? What kinds of offers are relevant? And so this combination of standardization of the 80% that's common with programmability for the 20% that's different, and then to your point, flexible connectivity so you can drop it into any existing systems and get the results you want. Another observation we've made is typically what happens when we walk into a brand, you're running the right campaign with the wrong data. And most of the time what people do is spend time replacing their tools as opposed to replacing the data. And if you get the data right, all your campaigns get better. All your ad campaigns are more reliable and the return on investment goes up. Your analytics get cleaner. Your people get more productive. And then you're able to program the system to really start to optimize as opposed to spending all your time just doing cleansing.
Chris, I'll throw this one over to you. We were kind of dancing around it in the first segment here, but there is this huge disruption. It's already happening in the world of advertising with cookies, in particular third-party cookies, and it puts tremendous importance on what's called first-party data. So first-party data, for those who don't know, means the data that you have in your company about your customers. So whether it's gathered through transactions over the years or surveys or phone calls or customer service reps talking to people, whatever it is, all the data that you have about your customers, that's your first-party data. Well, historically, in the last 10 years or so, companies have relied heavily on third-party cookies to know where people are going, what they're looking at, sharing this data across different platforms. And that's apparently all going to go away. Google has said that third-party cookies won't be supported. Apple is a big player in that scenario. So it's a very strange dynamic, but I'll bring Chris back in to comment on it. It's really disruptive, and we need to figure out what to do. And I think customer data platforms are a big part of the solution. What do you think?
I think it's a big part. And I guess what I'd say is our observation when we talk to our customers is there are three things that are going on. One is they're increasingly moving to directly transact with their consumer. And that's a big shift for every industry, whether it's insurance companies or banks or retailers. So that's sort of step one. Step two is because everybody's shifting there, the cost of acquiring a customer on an ad platform is going up. So your acquisition costs are going up. And then step three is the way you used to do targeting and acquisition, which is based on third-party cookies or mobile ad IDs, is going away. And so what's happening is what used to be viewed as a funnel in your customer life cycle, where you'd use some data to acquire a customer, put them into the funnel, and then have some other system manage them, is now turning into a wheel. You acquire customers, collect first-party data, understand what's happening to them, find your high-value customers, and then that key becomes the seed into ad networks to find lookalikes who are likely to be high value, because you want to find people who are going to be appropriate to go and acquire. And so this is completely changing how the brand thinks about this. So your first-party data is now important at every part of the life cycle. How you acquire a customer, how you turn them into a repeat purchaser, how they become loyal, how they become high value, and then how those high value people tell you how to go drive in the ad network to promote and find other people who are likely to be high value, because you can't afford to acquire a one and done person. You'll lose margin on the transaction. So what this is causing is all the brands to ask the question now across all touch points. I have to have this single view of the customer based on first-party data. I have to change my website so that I'm collecting with consent that first-party data. I have to use that data across my brand to continue to drive people through the wheel. And the faster I can spin the wheel, the better my business goes.
That's a really good point. And that explains why every freaking site you go to these days has a pop-up within 10 seconds of you going there. I mean, every single site.
Yep.
And the pop-ups went away, and then they all just came roaring back, right?
And you know, the thing that will start to happen is that this makes a brand need to have a different kind of promise to you as a user. In the past, they could just go collect it with a third-party cookie and you didn't consent at all.
Right.
But now that you have to have consent, the conversation matters. And if your experience of that conversation is a disconnected pop-up, you're unlikely to be willing to give the brand your information versus some other kind of thing. So what you'll start to see is brands putting economic value on acquiring that data and personalizing that first touch experience in the same way that they'd send you a thank you for shopping message after you've transacted now. That experience is going to become more curated because it matters to the bottom line.
Yeah, and you know, there's a related topic here. I'll throw this question over to you, and then we'll see what Saket says about it. There is all this concern about privacy, which I do understand. Obviously, it's important to recognize, not just from a security perspective, a governance perspective. You know, with GDPR, you've got the right to be forgotten, for example. And I've built upon that with my own theme that I think you guys will probably enjoy. I call it the right to be respected. And I think that is the principle by which organizations should operate, because if you do that, guess what? You're already going to be ticking the boxes necessary to keep an auditor happy, right? You're already going to be doing that just as part of your corporate DNA. But the other thing I think that could be very interesting here, and I'm seeing a little tiny bit of this, like from energy companies and from some of the credit card companies, et cetera, is sharing data with the end user about what they know about you. Just saying, hey, we noticed X, Y, and Z. You purchased these products in the past. You're not purchasing now. We're curious to know why. Kind of outreach efforts geared around sharing useful information that they have of you. To me, that's a huge opportunity to show we're paying attention to you. We've known what you've done. We appreciate you as a customer. Here's some insight we have based upon your buying patterns in the past. I'm seeing a little tiny bit of that. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. to kind of open the conversation between consumers and their companies that they work with. What do you think?
I completely agree. And I think what we're seeing is an evolution of what I'll call the human connection between an individual and the employee of the brand that's serving them. And what's changing is that social contract, if you think about it. I like to say what was creepy 5 years ago on Amazon is now rude if you don't do it. You remember the first time you logged in and you looked and you're like, oh my gosh, they know everything that I've purchased. That's so weird.
Right.
And now if I shop with a brand and they don't know everything I've purchased, I think that's so weird in a bad way. And so I think it's really important to recognize that what's changing is the expectations that consumers have about how they're treated by the brand. And some of that is privacy, but some of it, to your point, is tone and respect. It will vary by region. It varies by the type of customer you have. And so brands are going to have to become not just data intelligent, but socially aware. I have the data. What's respectful to use about the data? What should I be sharing with the customer? And what do they expect me to know in that moment? And that's that again, if we go back to the human connection, it involves not just giving teams the right data, but also training them how to use it in a way that meets the customer where they are.
Yeah. And speaking out loud. There's a guy I had on the show, I don't know, 6 months ago, who is a very impressive individual. He does coaching for executives and things of this nature, but he just has a lot of interesting thoughts that he shares. And he said the other day, I saw one of his clips, he goes, what happens at the door of indecision? Nothing. He said, if you're stuck in indecision, that means nothing is happening. So he said, write about it, talk about it, put it down on paper. He said, our ideas tend to crystallize as we put them either in words through our mouths or through our fingertips and crystallize it. Talk to your employees about these things, get their feedback on stuff, and you're going to find, you're going to figure it out, because the strange thing about these sort of cultural mores, to your point, Chris, is they do change, but you're aware of it. Like if you start talking about things like you just said, everyone will hear that and go, yeah, that's right, that's funny. I did think that was weird. They knew it 5 years ago. I think it's weird they don't know it now. That's because things have changed, and information is a big part of that life cycle. So we're really, I mean, it's interesting. We're advancing as a culture very rapidly with information. Just look at young kids, some of the information that they know, because they're sitting there on YouTube and TikTok, and there's just little bits of data coming their way, like brands. I don't know if you guys heard that there's some story that went around about how these young kids could identify all these brands. You're like, how the heck can you identify those brands? Because they're watching TV and videos and stuff, and it's just persisting in their brains, right? Isn't that, I think that's kind of funny. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, first of all, I will acknowledge that now I'm old enough to be out of touch, so I'm sure I don't get everything. But I also think it is, your point is exactly right. The speed to which the consumer is changing is only growing. And what it means is that brands have to be able to respond. And part of the value of having a really fantastic data platform is not just getting it in, but having it be agile enough and iterative enough to respond. Something new, as an example, TikTok wasn't a thing, but now you have to have presence on TikTok. Does your data platform let you do that? Does your data platform let you change the way you're talking? Does your data platform let you consume the new signals around that? Is your data platform flexible and allowing your employees to change and allowing your brand to change? And are you getting the signal quickly enough to learn? The speed of learning is so important right now. And I think anyone who thinks they've figured it out is already wrong. The world is going to change too quickly for us. And so really fantastic brands and companies are embracing that notion of agility. And then I just want to go back to, that means it's more important than ever to give tools. This is the other thing that I think platforms do. They're employee empowerment tools. They make the analyst's job easier. They simplify things for the data scientists. They make the marketer's job easier. They unlock more time for employee creativity and less time on data wrangling. That is a very clear benefit that you should get from your data platform.
Yeah, that's a great quote too. Anyone who thinks they've figured it out already is wrong. That's funny. I'll throw it over to Saket to comment on. There is something to be said about having enough enough flexibility in your system. I've just recently been working with an interesting company. They have some offshore resources, of course, to do things. And I'm finding out through asking questions which parts of their platform have agility and which absolutely do not. And there are some things you wouldn't expect, like, what? I can't change that at all now that I've started working with you. Maybe someone should have told me that when we onboarded this whole program. There are certain things in platforms that have to remain stable because they're holding up the whole solution. But you do have to be flexible. And of course, I think Nextla has done a pretty good job of evolving as you've watched the use cases come along, as you've watched people use the technology. You're evolving. What do you think about that, Saket?
Yeah, I think what Chris was saying, right, also sort of connects to the point that you have tools, and tools are meant to solve a particular problem. And you may have a tool to do marketing on a certain channel, like say YouTube, but a platform is more of a foundation that you can, in a flexible way, use it and build on top of that, right? That's what we mean when we say it's a platform. And to be able to build on top of that is that when that new use case of marketing on TikTok comes, you can also handle that because you're not framed into a fixed box. There's more flexibility around that. And what we have seen in this space is that you have to straddle both those things together. So while, for example, we are a no-code tool for many people and they can do their point things, it's also a platform that people can build on top of. And in a technology world, when we think about platforms, we often understand that there are APIs and interfaces to it. There's a software development kit I can build on top of. There's more flexible ways of using the product alongside new things that I may buy or other services that I may use. So it's to your audience, when you think about the platform part of it, a lot of it becomes not just what I can do with it today, but does it have the bones to carry me through the unknowns and the new things that come along the way, right?
I like that reference. Does it have the bones? Because the bones, that's the hard part of your body. It's going to keep you going, and then you have to be flexible, right? So that's all the joints.
Suddenly things you don't start to break apart because you put a new workload here, and then it's all
Oh yeah. And we do need to have scale these days too. That's the other, I think, critical success factor for organizations is to have some solution that can scale out, that can scale up, that can handle, increased traffic that is significant, but that can also scale down when traffic gets very low. We're getting very good about being able to not just scale up, but kind of scale back down too, and to manage costs and give visibility into costs. I mean, that's the other side of the equation. Real quick, right, Saket, is you have to be able to afford these solutions and know what that total cost of ownership is, right? Real quick.
Yeah, so there are two parts to scale, actually. There's a scale of data, and then there's also a scale of people. What organizations are also struggling with, how do I scale to my org? I have more people who have to work with data or do these things, right? So there's a scale of people and there's a scale of data. And on the scale of data, you're exactly right. It's not just about scaling up, but also scaling down. And the traditional approach was that, I get peak traffic to my website on Sunday evenings and I get, 10 million visitors in an hour. So all my capacity is built to handle that. But, on a Tuesday evening, that capacity is going waste, right? So now you are in a cloud environment. So you're not pre-committed to that. But interestingly, what happens is simply moving to the cloud doesn't get you the scale down. Your application has to be smart enough to now say that, well, I don't need all these servers running at this point. I can do with less capacity, and be able to get rid of that. In fact, to be honest, for most companies, if they don't know how to scale down and scale up dynamically, cloud will end up being more expensive. They're suddenly running more servers all the time, but in a more expensive environment, which is the cloud. And actually, to be honest, even within the cloud, when we talk about total cost of ownership, cloud is very interesting. You can buy a server on demand. You can reserve a server for a much lower cost ahead of time. And there is a marketplace where you can on demand get a server at a much lower cost than anything. And if your application doesn't know how to use all these three types of infrastructure in the right way, in the right combination, then you're not making the most of it. And so total cost of ownership, a big part of that is the data infrastructure and everything.
I love it. Well, folks, what a fantastic show today. We've been talking to Chris Jones from Amperity is the company, Amperity, and Saket Sarab from Nexla, Nexla. Fantastic show. Look these guys up online. We'll talk to you next time.